Martin L. Gross, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, good. I've already introduced you, and the public, I'm happy to say, is well familiar with what you've been doing in exposing government waste, the Whitewater fiasco, the outrage of the tax system. Now you come up with the political racket, deceit, self-interest, and corruption in American politics. Can you put your finger on the main source of the problem?
The main source of the problem is twofold. The political class and the political system. Neither are working, and the country is in a strange situation. It appears to be the same as always, but it's really mired in a mess created by politicians. It wasn't created by people outside the government. We have high taxes, stagnant income, government waste, weakened middle class, poor manufacturing base, lousy education. Is there a phone ringing?
Yes? Are you there, sir?
I'm here. We have corrupt politics. We raise $1.5 billion. Politicians raise $1.5 billion each year, and basically they're selling their soul to the large money people, to the lobbyists. And the PACs bring in $390 billion, and no one can say that they're not selling themselves. When you get a $10,000 check from a PAC, whether it's for cigarettes or for ecology or whatever it is, the politicians are mired in money, and they're mired in their party. You have party discipline, which is very strong, and the book really examines the whole system from the Electoral College, which makes no sense. We have a president who lost the election, got 43% of the vote, 57% voted against him, yet he's president. If you win California by one vote, you take the entire state's Electoral College, which is 20% of the amount needed to win. So that system doesn't work. The primary system doesn't work. There are states who are having primaries now, and Bob Dole's already been chosen. In some states, you vote in the primary if you're a member of the party. In other states, if you're an independent. In other states, you can vote in the Republican primary if you're a Democrat. The whole system really makes no sense, and the professional politician has created a method. Too often they lie. We have the president saying that the era of big government is over, we're going to have a middle-class tax cut. Then you've got corruption which is unseen, like Bob Packwood in his diary talks about taking $100,000 a gift to his campaign, which he said was a felony. And then he says, I did Shell Oil a favor for several $1 million in taxes, not because I like Shell Oil or because I like big oil companies, but I had a friend, close friend, who's a lobbyist, and I did this a favor to him. What's happened in America is that everything that is wrong, and there's a great deal wrong, belongs on the shoulders of the politicians, and the thesis of the book is that we have to change the entire political class. And changing the political class is not easy, but it can be done. Number one, obviously, term limits. Number two, very important, no retirement funds for politicians. Social Security like everyone else. But if they don't have retirement, they're not wanting to hang around. What happens, we've made public office so attractive that people want to make it a career. And career politicians spend a lot of money, take in a lot of money, and tend to get philosophically corrupt. The only state in the Union that has no professional politicians is New Hampshire. All the state legislators work for $100 a year. They work an average of 30 days and go home. New Hampshire, not by coincidence, is the only state with no sales tax and the only state with no state income tax. And the reason is that politicians have a vested interest in taxation. They have a vested interest in staying in office. They have a vested interest in lying. The campaign fund system is so outrageous that when they attempt to reform it, there are several bills up reforming it in Congress now, they're going to put a limit of $600,000 on House members, but they only spend $520 so far, so they're going to raise the limit, and they call it a reform. And basically, we've got to clean house, and my book really has some very radical proposals. The most radical proposal is to eliminate political parties in America.
All right, I want to get to that in just a moment, because as usual, you are putting your finger right on the problem. But as usual, I have to say, I doubt anything will come of it. But we can try anyway. We'll get back to Martin Gross on the Bob Grant Show, and I'm Bob Grant. Authored The Political Rackets, Deceit, Self-Interest, and Corruption. Did I hear you correctly? You said we've got to, disband political parties? Is that what you said?
Yes, you know, you look for small reform, you're going to get small reform. The political parties are private corporations. They were necessary in the 19th century. We needed communication. People of like opinion got together. But today, communications is perfect. People tend to know as much about politics as politicians. And the money corrupts. The money corrupts in two ways. One, rich people can throw in 30 million, and others sell their souls for the money. Now, if you eliminate political parties, you do a very simple thing. You have a philanthropic organization that collects money from around the country, any amount, and a computer dispenses it to all candidates equally for the office. To run for office, you need a minimum number of signatures. In Ohio, you're only required to have 50 signatures to get on the congressional ballot. 20 people can run for office. And unlike the present America, where you can win with 10% of the vote, the governor of Connecticut only got 37%. This time, Weicker got 40. President only got 43. We have a majority law so that you have a runoff of the top two candidates for every office from dog catcher to president. Several things happen. One, no retirement benefits for any politician other than Social Security. Term limits of 2 terms. What happens is that ordinary citizens like me and you run for office by getting a handful of names going on the ballot. No political paid advertising on television or radio. Free time on TV and radio, and you get a check from the computer. You can't raise a nickel. You can't spend your own nickel. You can't borrow a nickel, otherwise you go to jail. So the lobbyists are destroyed immediately because they have nothing to offer you. And what happens is you get a whole change of attitude and venue. Right now, the typical politician, whether he's a crook or an honest man, is philosophically corrupt because he owes his party, he owes his contributors, he owes his lobbyists, he owes his special interests. This way, with a nonpartisan system, they get to Congress or the legislature, and they create a caucus, and they come in as their own man. Right now, if you work your way up through the party, by the time you get to elective office, you're half ruined. After 5 years, you're ruined. So I visualize a totally different America, because the present America, with the mess we're in, and with the professional politicians playing for $4 million retirement funds, Pat Schroeder contributed $150,000 in her lifetime, and she's getting $4 million in retirement. So you've got a goal that they want to reach in retirement, then you've got this whole concept of party discipline. Now, party discipline has destroyed Social Security. Party discipline creates a government that lies. For example, they say there's 5.5 unemployment. Both parties claim it. Both parties know the real figure, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is 10.8%. They say the budget is going to be balanced in 2002. The Social Security Administration says there will be a $112 billion deficit that year if they plan to balance it, because $112 billion is the amount they're going to steal from Social Security in 2002, which is not counted on the deficit. So basically, politics can be corrupting. Political parties increase the philosophical corruption, and the money destroys the possibility for honesty. So I say you can play around with reform till the cows come home. Until you do a clean sweep, we're going to have a rotten government.
What about the argument that political parties are needed in order to provide the machinery to have political campaigns?
Well, the machinery is necessary now because you need all the dough. But if you have this little computer who doesn't know anything, gets a check from the Rockefeller Foundation for $1 million, doesn't go to any particular candidate, it goes to the 7 guys running for Congress in New Jersey. And they get a check for $100,000. They can't raise a nickel. They can't contribute a nickel. They can't borrow a nickel. Otherwise, they go to jail. and they spend that money, and everybody's equal, and there's no pandering for the money because it's all going into a machine. Makes no difference if you give them $2 or $1 million. It's not going to any particular candidate. Now, addition to that, you've got lobbyists who are so thoroughly entrenched because they have the whip hand. They've got $390 million in PAC money each year, and people salivate, the politicians salivate for that money. Well, there are not going to be any PACs because there's not going to be any lobbyists with anything to give you. They'll have to make a pitch to you just like a citizen would because there's no check, there's nothing there. You see, I've come to the conclusion after having written 5 books on government that you can't reform the mafia and you can't reform the political system as it is. It's got to be swept away totally. And I think that eventually people are going to come to that conclusion. Look, why should the Republican Party insist on an abortion plank when half the Republicans don't want an abortion plank? But if you don't have the Republican Party, you don't have an abortion plank. The parties have become divisive over race, over abortion, over gun control, over Medicare. There aren't 3 politicians in America looking at the problems of America from an objective point of view. This will create objectivity because the fellow who gets elected to Congress won't owe anything to anybody, either in allegiance or in money. So I've thought about it a long time, and I'm convinced it's the only way. Now, how does nonpartisan work? It's quite simple. You get signatures, maybe instead of 50 in Ohio, you get 500 signatures. You get on the ballot. You go around talking to people, radio and TV. You get a check. You make up brochures, etc. And if you don't get a majority, you get a runoff of the top 2 guys. We're the only country in the world where people are elected to office without a majority. In the parliamentary system, they form a coalition. In the presidential system, like France, Russia, they have a runoff. America, Mr. Clinton was opposed by 50. If Mr. Clinton wins again, it's my prediction he'll get 44%. Well, it makes no sense. So the whole thing was constructed for an ancient time with no communication. We're no longer an ancient country. People are informed. We have communications. The parties are just not only obstructions, but they're detrimental because they promise things to their members if they go along with the party structure. Instead, if you form a caucus on each problem, the people who are for it will line up, the people against it, and you'll vote. Do you know the Constitution doesn't mention majority leaders or minority leaders? That's an invention of the Congress. The Constitution only mentions the Speaker. He's the only truly elected official in the Congress. But we've invented the party system. And then what happens in our system? The lawyers take over. Well, the D.C. Bar Association had 1,000 lawyers in 1950. And today they have 65,000.
All right, Martin Gross, you want to stay on the line? I want to hear more, and I'm sure so does, more importantly, so does the public. They want to hear more from Martin L. Gross. The Political Racket, Deceit, Self-Interest, and Corruption in American Politics. Is anything going to come of these recommendations? I doubt it, but we should definitely give it a try anyway. And Martin Gross is with us. You say that politicians lie so often that they seem pathological, yet they continue to fool the voters. Why do they continue to fool the voters? Are people that dumb or what?
No, people can't believe that people can be as openly disreputable as politicians are. Some politicians are. You see, crooks do it through stealth. We don't know that they're stealing. Politicians do it right in our face. Mr. Weicker, in running for governor of Connecticut, said he was against the income tax, and as soon as he was elected, he put it in. He was lying, straightforward, but he knew the short memory of the people of America. The same with President Clinton. Mr. Bush, read my lips. They get away with it because Americans, by and large, are honest people, and they can't believe that such dignified people as important politicians can lie the way they do. So basically, why do they lie? Because they have an entrenched interest in getting elected. First, honor, prestige, dignity, money, retirement. And many of these people think they're Ubermenschen. You know, they're egomaniacs. They think they're bigger than me and you. And we have to have ways to cut them down. And one way to cut them down is the initiative and referendum. Only 24 states have it. New Jersey doesn't have it. New York doesn't have it. Connecticut. If Connecticut had it, we would have voted out the income tax a week after Weicker put it in. 82% of the poll were against it. But the people are disenfranchised by the parties. The parties become replacement tools for the political process, and you don't need them because people say, well, I can't run for Congress because I'm not a big shot in the Republican or Democratic Party. But under my system, without parties, all you do is you get some signatures, you go down to the election clerk, you give them the petition. If you get on the ballot, you get a check, and you're all done. So right now you work up through the party to run government, and that method, that procedure, that route is the one that destroys the decent philosophy of most Americans. So we have the wrong people with the wrong system doing the wrong job, and we've got to change it. Now, for example, let's say you're an independent. You want to get on the Florida ballot. You need 200,000 signatures and $20,000 in cash. I mean, it's ridiculous. So what do? The two parties get together, and they create laws in the state legislature, making it almost impossible for third parties or independents to get there. In Connecticut, if you don't get 20% of the vote, you're no longer a major party. In Europe, if you get 5% of the vote, you get a hunk in the parliament. Now, the PACs, of course, are another indecent thing where organizations, trade unions, associations, corporations put together money, and they go to the politician and say, here's $10,000. Now, the funny thing is, the definition of bribery, legal bribery, is quid pro quo, something for something. If they can prove that you offered something for the campaign contribution, you're a criminal. So a guy named O'Connell, U.S. attorney in California, years ago, received a call from a lobbyist saying that legislators in the state of California are promising me things if I give them contributions. He said, for their own pocket? He said, no, just campaign contributions. So he wired the lobbyists, and as a result, 5 legislators are in jail now in California, not for taking money for themselves, but for promising something definitive for campaign contributions. So we're dealing in a semi-criminal activity to begin with, proved by the fact that when they openly say, I'll vote for your bill, you can go to jail. So the whole system, which used to be pretty good, got destroyed by PACs, rich lobbyists, $1.5 billion in the kitty every 4 years in campaign money. It got destroyed by big retirement funds. Now, let me give you an example of the racket in retirement. When their salary was increased 33% about 3 years ago in Congress, their pensions went up 33% because the pension racket is based on the highest 3 years of income. So not only did they get that, but so each guy picked up $500,000 or $1 million in retirement by that pay increase. As I say, Pat Schroeder's put in $150,000, and she's getting $4 million. But Mr. Foley just retired with $129,000, and what will happen is in 2 years he'll be having a pension larger than his salary. So what happens is we have these inducements to have people become professional politicians, like professional boxers. And the answer is eliminate all professionals from the business in 4 ways. 1, no political parties. 2, no big campaign, no campaign funds from lobbyists or public. No retirement fund. And also another important thing is to change the system so that nobody gets elected without a majority. Georgia is the only state in the union that requires a majority for Congress. They had a runoff in '92 because nobody got a majority. So the whole thing stinks from top to bottom. And trying to reform it is like reforming the mafia. You can't do it. You got to sweep it out, and if we do sweep it out, I'll tell you what will happen. The middle class voice, what I call the middle class manifesto, will take over. And you're going to have much lower taxes, you can have term limits, you can have campaign reform, you can have a whole different tax system, corruption will disappear, the welfare system will die, the lobbyists will be powerless, the politicians will stop lying because there's nothing to gain, and they'll go home. Right now, do you know what they do? 50% become lobbyists after they leave Congress at double their salaries. Why? Because they invented a law for themselves that enables them, and only they, to walk onto the floor of Congress during a vote because they're ex-congressmen. So naturally they're in demand by the lobbyists.
That's an outrage. I'm interrupting you because we have to take a brief time out. Then we have a question from a caller who wants to talk to you about growth. Stay right where you are. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Bob Grant. question for you from Walter in Flushing, New York. Yes, hello, Walter.
Hi, Bob. This is Walter, but I'm on my car phone on the New Jersey Turnpike. Mr. Gross, I live in the city of New York and have done so for the most part for the last 47 years. And for the last 20 years or so, we've had an experiment going on in the educational system of the city of New York that sounds very similar to what you advocate should be done to the national government. And that is to say that any individual can get a petition up, run for school board, get funding to run for that position. And what's turned out is the lowest voter turnout for school board elections ever recorded before, the highest amount of corruption and graft and inefficiency that's ever been discovered and noted before, and an exceptionally poor educational system.
Well,
I don't know of anybody.
I think you're mixing apples and oranges. You've got a special.
Mr. Gross, first of all, where do you live?
I live in Connecticut. You've got a special. For example, we have our RTM, which is our board here, is nonpartisan, and there's no corruption. It does beautifully. We have lower taxes than Westchester. Now, your example is ridiculous because New York City's a cesspool. That's why. Because you've got people
blame it on the people of the city of New York, right? Let's blame it on the people who live here, right? The hard-working people like me.
I lived in New York for 25 years, and I know New York City's a cesspool.
And you ran away. Where are we going to run when your system fails in the United States? What country do I go back to?
It can't fail because people like you and me and Bob Grant will run for office because we have nothing to gain. We're going to contribute to the public commonweal.
Sir, I am an elected party official. I ran for office. I spent my own money. I put my money where my mouth is. I went out and got a petition signature signed.
Good.
I worked so hard to the extent
Tell me, what's the advantage of a political party? Give me one single advantage. I can't think of any.
It allows people of a similar belief structure to gather together, to coalesce.
Oh, you mean, for example, when I vote Republican, I'm voting for the abortion plank and for the gun control and for the law that says you can't have replacement on strikes. I mean, it's ridiculous. Political parties are caricatures of opinion. If a person's a Democrat, does that mean he wants to spend $400 billion a year on welfare and support unwed mothers in my town at $1,530 rent per month? No. Political parties are stereotypical caricatures.
No, you're getting away from what I brought up.
They make no sense whatsoever, and we don't need them.
Mr. Gross, you're very adept at mishandling the issues. You still haven't answered the question about the New York City school board elections. The simple fact is,
we have a school board in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is perfect. It's perfectly legitimate. It's not corrupt, and it's nonpartisan. No, what I'm trying to tell you is New York City is the biggest cesspool in America, and the school boards can't function properly because the people who run for office are looking to steal money and to get gain.
Gentlemen, I'm going to have
American cities, that doesn't happen.
I'm going to have to step in here, not because I want to. Believe me, that's the last thing I want to do, but because I have to. And Martin Gross, if you want to stay on the line, I'd be more than happy to hold you over. Walter, I thank you for your spirited entry into the dialogue. I'm Bob Grant. We'll get together on the Bob Grant Show again. My thanks to the many of you who continue to write these strong letters of support, encouragement. It is absolutely the most gratifying experience I've had in my life. Martin Gross has been spending this time with us. He has authored a truly revolutionary book entitled, Martin, I know the book is entitled The Political Racket, and that's what it is, but as you can see from the gentleman who was on the line, there is a vested interest, an entrenched group that want to keep the status quo. How do we change all that?
Well, when I wrote the Government Racket on Washington Waste back in '92, I explained what's happening and how the money was being thrown away, and little by little, they just adopted my helium thing last week, and every week or so they adopt another one of my proposals. They've taken about 12. And so what you've got to do is get the machinery of dissent going. That's how the Soviet Union fell, and I don't mean for America to fall, but I mean for America to grow by changing. The closer that the politician is to the citizen, the better the result. That's why the town meeting of New England was so good, because everyone voted. Now, if you can't have every citizen be in government, you can have citizen politicians, which means no money, no party, no lobbyists, no PACs, no vested interest, no nonsense. Now, take a very simple thing like the tax system. If we had citizens in Congress unaffiliated with a party and a vote came up on closing the IRS, I can guarantee you that the IRS would be closed the first day. As a matter of fact, when Trafficant of Ohio put in a little bill asking the tax court to be like other courts, innocent until proven guilty. He got a majority of the votes. He got 263 on the petition. He went to Nancy Johnson of Connecticut, a Republican, who's head of the House Oversight Committee and IRS, and she killed the bill in committee, the reasoning being, if we follow the Bill of Rights, we can't collect the money. But if Nancy Johnson were an ordinary citizen who didn't belong to a party, Democrat or Republican, we would have the change in the law. Social Security. Both parties lie. Both parties lie, and they say that the money goes to the aged. 15% of the money is stolen every Monday morning and goes into the general fund. They're talking about gas tax. 37% of the gas tax goes in the general fund. The American people want a system different. The politician's not going to give it. Got to get rid of the politician.
Thank you very much, Martin Gross. You are a national treasure. I appreciate you taking this time.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, Martin Gross, clean up American politics, he says. He says we blame builders if a home is badly constructed. We blame automakers if a car has to be recalled. But when it comes to government, we put the blame everywhere except where it belongs, on the heads of American politicians of both parties who run the country. He says there's no doubt about the mess. High taxes, government waste in multi-billions, a weakened middle class, loss of our manufacturing base, trade deficits, corrupt campaign financing, the failure of welfare, and tolerance for corrupt hijinks, for corporate hijinks. And speaking of hijinks, what about his slickness? Well, you should see what Martin Gross says about him. Anyway, let's get back to our telephones.